His mistress called me daily, describing intimate details of their relationship. She'd laugh about how pathetic I was, how easily I was being replaced. For months, I listened to her cruelty in silence. Then I invited her to coffee at the place where she thought she was meeting him. What she found instead changed everything. The phone rang at exactly 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, the same time it had rung every Tuesday for the past 3 months. I was stirring pasta sauce when I heard that familiar, sickeningly sweet voice on the other end. "Chloe? It's Mila. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The way she said my name, like it tasted bitter on her tongue, made my stomach clench. But I steadied my breathing, set down the wooden spoon, and prepared myself for another session of calculated torture. "Hello, Mila." My voice came out exactly as I'd practiced. Weary, defeated, with just enough tremor to suggest I was barely holding myself together. "I just had to call and tell you about the most amazing weekend Nolan and I had." She paused, savoring the moment like expensive wine. "We went to that little bed and breakfast in Monterey, you know, the one with the ocean view? He said you two used to go there for anniversaries." Before we continue, if you believe women deserve to reclaim their power and never accept being silenced, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need this. Now let's see how I fought back. My fingers tightened around the phone. Seaside Haven. We'd spent our first anniversary there, our third, our fifth. I remembered the way Nolan used to trace patterns on my back while we listened to the waves crash against the rocks below our window. The memory felt like a physical blow, but I swallowed the pain and let it fuel my resolve. "That sounds lovely," I managed, injecting just enough sadness into my tone to make her feel victorious. "Oh, it was more than lovely. He told me he'd never felt so free, so alive. He said being with you had become like wearing a coat that was 3 sizes too small, suffocating and uncomfortable." Her laugh was sharp, designed to cut. "He even said your cooking had gotten boring. Same 5 meals on rotation," he told me. "Like eating at a nursing home." I glanced at the pasta sauce, his favorite recipe, one I'd perfected over 7 years of marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was preparing dinner for a man who apparently mocked my cooking to his mistress. "I see," I whispered, letting the words hang in the air like a confession of defeat. "You know what the best part was, though?" Mila continued, her voice taking on that particular tone of cruelty that had become her signature. "He said he feels guilty sometimes, but then he remembers how you've let yourself go. She doesn't even try anymore," he said. "When I come home, she's in those awful sweats, hair in a messy bun, looking like she's given up on life." I touched my hair self-consciously. It was indeed in a messy bun, and yes, I was wearing comfortable clothes. But I'd been working from home, managing our household, trying to keep our life together while he was apparently dissecting my appearance with another woman. The silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, waiting for me to break, to beg, to give her the dramatic reaction she craved. Instead, I practiced the technique I'd perfected over these months of torture. I let the pause extend just long enough to suggest I was fighting back tears, then delivered my response in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. "Is that so? Oh, Chloe." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "I almost feel sorry for you. Almost. But then I remember that you're living in a fantasy, thinking you still have a marriage worth saving." I walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the garden where Nolan and I had once planned to build a swing set for the children we'd dreamed of having. The wooden stakes were still there, marking the corners where we'd measured and discussed and hoped. Now they looked like tiny gravestones in the fading light. "Last Thursday," Mila continued, "we went to that new restaurant downtown, Bella Vista? The one with the private booths? He said he'd been wanting to take you there for your birthday, but then he realized he'd rather share new experiences with someone who actually appreciates them." My birthday. 3 weeks ago. He'd taken me to our usual chain restaurant, claimed he'd forgotten to make reservations anywhere special. I'd pretended not to mind, had even smiled and thanked him for the generic card he'd obviously picked up last minute from the gas station. "He's so thoughtful," I said, my voice breaking just slightly on the last word. It wasn't entirely acting. The betrayal still stung even though I'd known about it for months. "He really is. And the gifts, Chloe. The jewelry, the lingerie, the weekend getaways. He told me he'd stopped buying you things because you never seemed to appreciate them. She'd rather have practical gifts," he said. "Vacuum cleaners and coffee makers. No romance left in her." I remembered the last gift he'd given me, a new set of kitchen knives for Christmas. I'd thanked him, used them to prepare meals he apparently complained about to his mistress. The cosmic joke of it all was almost funny in a twisted way. "He sounds very generous," I replied, adding a slight sniff to suggest I was crying. "Oh, he is. Last week he surprised me with a weekend in Napa Valley. We stayed at this incredible resort, the kind of place where they bring champagne to your room and draw baths with rose petals. He said he'd never done anything like that for anyone before. Mila makes me want to be romantic again," he told me. "She brings out the man I used to be." I closed my eyes, remembering our 10th anniversary just 6 months ago. He'd taken me to dinner at a chain restaurant and given me a gift card to Target. I'd convinced myself that practical love was more mature, more stable than grand gestures. "That's wonderful for you both," I said, my voice hollow. "You know what I think, Chloe?" Mila's tone shifted, becoming more direct, more vicious. "I think you're holding on to something that's already dead. He doesn't love you anymore. He doesn't want you. He's just too much of a coward to file for divorce himself." The words hit their mark, but not in the way she intended. Instead of crushing me, they crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. A strange sense of power that came from knowing something she didn't. "Maybe you're right," I said, letting my voice crack with what she would interpret as defeat. "I know I'm right. And honestly, I'm doing you a favor by calling. Someone needs to wake you up from this pathetic delusion that you still have a husband." I heard Nolan's car in the driveway, the familiar sound of his engine shutting off, his footsteps on the front porch. He'd be walking through that door any moment, expecting dinner and normalcy, having no idea that his mistress had just spent 20 minutes describing their intimate moments to his wife. "I should go," I said softly. "He's home." Of course he is. Back to his boring, predictable life with his boring, predictable wife. Mila's laugh was sharp and triumphant. "Enjoy your evening, Chloe. I know I'll enjoy mine thinking about how pathetic this all is." The line went dead just as Nolan walked through the front door. He looked tired, slightly guilty, but he smiled when he saw me. "Something smells amazing," he said, hanging his coat in the closet. "What are you making?" "Your favorite pasta," I replied, turning back to the stove. "How was your meeting?" "Long, boring. You know how it is." He came up behind me, placed his hands on my shoulders. "I'm sorry I've been working so much lately. I know it's hard on you." I leaned back against him, feeling the weight of his hands, the warmth of his body. 3 months ago, this moment would have filled me with love and forgiveness. Now it felt like a performance we were both giving, though only I knew we had an audience. "It's okay," I said. "I understand." What I didn't tell him was that I understood far more than he realized. I understood that while he was apologizing for working late, his mistress was probably getting ready for bed, replaying our conversation and feeling victorious. I understood that his guilt was making him kinder to me, more attentive, which only made Mila's cruelty more potent. But most importantly, I understood something that neither of them knew yet. Something that would change everything. As I served dinner, I thought about the 3 pregnancy tests hidden in my dresser drawer, all showing the same result. 43 days along according to my calculations. A secret that would shift the balance of power in ways that Mila, with all her cruel phone calls and detailed descriptions of their affair, could never imagine. I watched Nolan eat the pasta he'd apparently called boring, compliment the sauce he'd mocked to another woman, and I smiled. Not the defeated smile of a broken wife, but the quiet smile of someone who knew that the game was about to change completely. The phone would ring again on Thursday morning, right after he left for his business meeting. Mila would call with more stories, more cruelty, more attempts to break me down. And I would listen, respond with my practiced weakness, and let her believe she was winning. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let your enemy think they've already won, while you prepare to show them exactly how wrong they are. That night, as Nolan slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and let my mind drift back to the darkest chapter of our marriage, one he believed was buried and forgotten. It had been 8 months ago when I'd first seen those 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. The joy that flooded through me was so pure, so overwhelming that I'd actually laughed out loud in our bathroom. We'd been trying for over a year and finally it was happening. I'd planned the perfect way to tell him. A small gift box with tiny baby shoes inside, placed on his pillow while he was in the shower. I could still remember the look on his face when he opened it. Not joy, not excitement, but something that looked almost like panic. Are you sure? He'd asked, his voice strangely flat. 3 tests, I'd said, beaming. All positive. We're going to be parents, Nolan. He'd hugged me then, said all the right words, but something in his embrace felt wrong. Too tight, too desperate, like he was trying to squeeze the life out of something. The weeks that followed were a blur of strange behavior I'd attributed to normal expectant father nerves. He'd become obsessively attentive about my evening routine, insisting on making my chamomile tea himself every night. You're growing a baby, he'd say with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Let me take care of you. The tea tasted different somehow, more bitter with an earthy undertone I couldn't place. When I mentioned it, he'd laugh and say he was trying a new brand, something organic and supposedly better for pregnant women. I'd drink it gratefully, touched by his thoughtfulness. The cramping started on a Tuesday morning, sharp and low in my abdomen. By evening there was blood. By Thursday it was over. These things happen, the emergency room doctor had said gently. First trimester losses are more common than people realize. There's nothing you could have done differently. I'd grieved deeply, blamed myself for weeks. Nolan had been supportive in all the right ways, bringing me flowers, holding me while I cried, suggesting we wait a few months before trying again. His relief, which he thought he was hiding, felt like salt in an open wound. The follow-up appointment 3 weeks later was routine. Blood work, physical exam, the doctor checking to make sure everything was healing properly. I almost didn't go. What was the point of examining the aftermath of failure? Dr. Martinez had frowned at my blood results, then frowned deeper. Chloe, I'm seeing some unusual markers in your system. Have you been taking any herbal supplements? Anything not prescribed? No, I'd said, confused. Just prenatal vitamins and the calcium tablets you recommended. She'd pulled out a reference chart, her expression growing more concerned. I'm seeing traces of blue cohosh and pennyroyal. These are herbs that can cause uterine contractions. They're sometimes used to induce labor or other things. The bottom dropped out of my world. Other things. In high enough concentrations they can cause miscarriage. They're dangerous, especially in the first trimester. She'd looked at me carefully. You're certain you haven't taken anything containing these herbs? I'd driven home in a daze, her words echoing in my mind. When I'd gotten to our kitchen, I'd torn through every cabinet, every drawer, looking for something I hoped I wouldn't find. Behind Nolan's vitamin bottles, pushed far back where I'd never think to look, I discovered a small brown bottle labeled Evening Blend Women's Wellness Tea. The ingredient list read like a catalog of everything Dr. Martinez had found in my blood. Blue cohosh, pennyroyal, black cohosh, and other herbs I'd never heard of. I'd stood there holding that bottle, my hands shaking, while the truth crashed over me like a physical blow. My husband, the man who'd held me while I cried over our lost baby, had been the one who'd killed it. The rage that filled me was so pure, so white-hot, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I'd wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and throw things and demand answers. Instead, I'd carefully placed the bottle back where I'd found it and made a decision that would change everything. I would never tell him I knew. Over the following months, I'd watched him with new eyes. The way he'd suggest we wait longer before trying again. How he'd carefully monitor my cycle, becoming anxious around ovulation. The relief in his posture when my period would arrive each month. His mother had started dropping hints about grandchildren during family dinners, and I'd watched Nolan deflect with practiced ease. We're not ready yet, he'd say. Maybe next year. But his eyes would find mine across the table and I'd see the warning there. Don't you dare contradict me. The most sickening part was how considerate he'd become afterward. Flowers for no reason, surprise dinners out, weekend getaways to bed and breakfasts. I'd thought he was trying to help me heal from our loss. Now I realized he was celebrating. During one of those weekends, to a place called Seaside Haven, ironically the same place Mila had mentioned on the phone, he'd been particularly affectionate. We'd walked along the beach at sunset and he'd pulled me close. I love our life just the way it is, he'd said, kissing my temple. Sometimes I think we're perfect as we are, you know? Just us. I'd smiled and agreed even as my stomach churned. Just us. No complications, no children to complicate his perfectly controlled world. But Nolan had underestimated his own father, a man who'd seen through his son's selfishness long before I had. The conversation had happened during our last Christmas together, just 3 months before the miscarriage. Nolan's father, William, had pulled me aside while Nolan was outside helping his mother with something. "Chloe," he'd said, his weathered hands gentle on my shoulders. "I want you to know something important. When you give this family its first grandchild, and you will, everything will shift in your favor." At the time, I'd thought it was just a sweet comment from a man who desperately wanted grandchildren. William had always been kinder to me than his wife, more accepting, more genuinely warm. He'd treat me like the daughter he'd never had, while his actual son treated me like an inconvenience. "That's very sweet, William," I'd said. "I hope we can give you grandchildren soon." His eyes had grown serious. "I'm not being sweet, dear. I'm being practical. I've made sure of it." I hadn't understood what he meant then. After he'd passed away suddenly from a heart attack 6 weeks later, the comment had faded into the background of grief and funeral arrangements. It wasn't until 6 months after his death, when the lawyer had finally sorted through the estate documents, that the full picture emerged. The will had been revised just 2 months before his death, and buried in the legal language was a clause that made my blood run cold. Upon the birth of William Foster's first biological grandchild, the document read, "The following assets shall be transferred into an irrevocable trust for said child. The rental property at 847 Maple Street, portfolio account number 4471 with Meridian Investments, and a 40% ownership stake in Foster & Sons Hardware." The trust would be managed by the child's primary legal guardian, a role that, by law and by William's specific designation, would fall to me as the mother, not to Nolan as the father. I'd read that clause over and over, my hands trembling. The rental property alone was worth over $300,000. The investment portfolio had grown to nearly $180,000. And Foster & Sons Hardware, while small, was profitable and provided steady income. Suddenly, Nolan's desperate opposition to having children made perfect sense. It wasn't about not wanting to be a father. It was about not wanting to lose control of money he considered his inheritance. The bitter irony was devastating. His father had seen his son's true nature and had crafted the perfect insurance policy. William had known that any grandchild of his would need protection from Nolan's selfishness, so he'd created a financial safety net that would activate the moment that child was born. Nolan knew about this clause. He'd been present when the will was read, had seen the lawyer explain the terms. His face had remained carefully neutral, but I'd noticed how his jaw had tightened, how his hands had clenched in his lap. No wonder he'd been so desperate to prevent my pregnancy. No wonder he'd resorted to herbs and manipulation instead of just having an honest conversation about not wanting children. A conversation would have required him to admit he was prioritizing money over my dreams of motherhood. Now, lying in the darkness beside him, I placed my hand on my still flat stomach where a new life was growing. 43 days along, and this time I was the only one who knew. This pregnancy wasn't just about the baby I'd longed for. It was about justice. It was about a wise old man's foresight and a father's love protecting his future grandchild from his own son's greed. Nolan shifted beside me, murmuring something in his sleep. Probably dreaming about Mila, about his carefully constructed double life where he got to play the romantic leading man while keeping his boring wife safely contained and childless at home. He had no idea that his world was about to change forever. That his father's final gift was growing inside me, bringing with it not just new life, but a complete redistribution of power. The man who'd poisoned his own wife to prevent losing money was about to discover that some things were more powerful than his control, more permanent than his schemes. And I was going to enjoy every moment of his realization. 3 weeks passed before I made my move. 3 weeks of Mila's regular calls, each one more vicious than the last, each one adding another layer to my growing plan. She'd grown bolder, more detailed in her descriptions, clearly feeding off what she perceived as my increasing weakness. But I wasn't getting weaker. I was getting ready. The pregnancy symptoms had started in earnest. Morning queasiness that I hid from Nolan by claiming I had a stomach bug, exhaustion that I blamed on work stress. Every secret symptom felt like armor I was putting on, piece by piece preparing for battle. I spent hours researching the perfect location for our confrontation. It had to be public enough that she couldn't cause a scene, intimate enough for a private conversation, and symbolic enough to give me the psychological advantage I needed. Murphy's Diner sat on the corner of 5th and Main, its red vinyl booths and checkered floors unchanged since the 1950s. Nolan and I had discovered it during our second year of marriage, when we'd been apartment hunting in that neighborhood. Every Sunday morning for 3 years we'd shared coffee and pancakes there, planning our future over bottomless cups and warm syrup. I told him once that Murphy's felt like the place where we'd fallen deepest in love, where all our dreams had taken shape. He'd laughed and kissed powdered sugar off my lips, promising we'd bring our children there someday for birthday breakfasts and celebration dinners. The irony of choosing that location wasn't lost on me. In a place where I'd once planned a future with him, I was about to destroy the future he'd built without me. I arrived at 1:30, 30 minutes before the meeting I'd arranged. The lunch crowd was thinning out, leaving mostly empty booths and the low murmur of afternoon coffee drinkers. I chose the corner booth where Nolan and I used to sit, positioning myself with a clear view of the entrance and my back to the wall. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and sensible shoes, approached with a coffee pot. "Just coffee today, honey?" "Yes, please. I'm waiting for someone." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, using its heat to steady my nerves. At exactly 1:45, I pulled out the burner phone I'd purchased with cash the week before. The app I'd downloaded let me send texts from any number, and I'd already programmed in Nolan's contact information. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I crafted the message that would bring Mila running. "Can't wait to see you. Murphy's at 2. Need to talk about us." And I'd studied Nolan's texting patterns for months, noting his tendency toward brief messages, his habit of signing texts with his initial when he was being romantic. I'd even referenced their dinner at Bella Vista from the week before, adding just enough specificity to make the message believable. Her response came back within seconds. "Finally. I've been hoping you'd say that. See you soon." The heart emoji made my stomach turn, but it also confirmed what I'd suspected. She thought this meeting was going to be significant. Maybe she was expecting him to finally leave me or propose, or make some grand declaration. Whatever she was expecting, it definitely wasn't me. I ordered a slice of apple pie I had no intention of eating, just to give myself something to do with my hands while I waited. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2 o'clock with agonizing slowness. At 2:03 the diner door chimed and she walked in. Mila moved like someone who owned every room she entered, her heels clicking confidently against the checkered floor. She wore the red dress she'd described to me in excruciating detail during one of her calls. The one Nolan had supposedly said brought out the color in her eyes, the one she'd worn to their dinner at that expensive steakhouse downtown. Her dark hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless despite the afternoon heat. She'd clearly put effort into looking stunning for what she thought would be a romantic meeting with my husband. Her eyes swept the diner, searching for Nolan's familiar figure. I watched her face change as she processed the mostly empty restaurant, the absence of the man she'd come to meet. Her gaze landed on me last and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. Confusion flickered first. Why was the pathetic wife sitting in the restaurant where she was supposed to meet her lover? Then came anger, sharp and immediate as she realized she'd been deceived. Finally, that familiar smirk of superiority settled over her features, the same expression I'd learned to hate during our phone conversations. "Wow." Her voice carried clearly across the quiet diner, causing several customers to look up from their meals. "This must be rock bottom for you, Chloe. Did you really think ambushing me would change anything?" She clutched her designer purse like a weapon, her whole body radiating the kind of confidence that comes from believing you're untouchable. Other diners were starting to stare, but their attention didn't seem to bother her. If anything, she seemed to enjoy having an audience for my humiliation. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle her. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost conversational. "Sit down, Mila. Please." "I don't think so." She turned to leave, her heels already clicking toward the door. "Whatever pathetic plea you've prepared, I'm not interested in hearing it. I'm not here to fight." The words stopped her mid-stride. "I just thought you should know something important." She turned back, one perfectly shaped eyebrow raised in skeptical amusement. "What could you possibly tell me that I don't already know?" I gestured to the empty seat across from me. "Sit. Just for a minute." Something in my tone must have intrigued her because she hesitated. Maybe it was the lack of desperation in my voice, or the fact that I wasn't crying or begging like she'd expected. After a moment she slid into the booth across from me, but perched on the edge like she might bolt at any second. You have 2 minutes, she said, checking her watch with theatrical impatience. Then I'm leaving and I'm calling Nolan to tell him about your little stunt. I studied her face, memorizing the smugness in her expression, the certainty that she held all the power in this situation. In a few seconds that certainty would shatter completely. I'm pregnant, I said simply. The words hung in the air between us. I watched her process them, saw the moment when their significance hit her. Her confident smile faltered just slightly. Congratulations, she said finally, but her voice had lost some of its edge. I'm sure Nolan is thrilled. 43 days along. I continued as if she hadn't spoken. And this time he can't stop it. That got her attention. Her eyes sharpened, focusing on me with new intensity. What do you mean, this time? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded copy of William's will that I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. The paper was slightly worn from handling, but the legal language was still crisp and clear. I placed it on the table between us, right next to the untouched slice of apple pie, and slid it toward her. You don't have to believe me about the pregnancy, Mila. But he will. I tapped the document with one finger. And when you ask him about this, you'll understand exactly why. Her laughter was sharp and too loud for the quiet diner, causing the elderly couple 2 booths over to frown in our direction. You really think a baby is going to make him choose you? That's adorable. She leaned back in the booth, her confidence returning as she dismissed my revelation. He's already told me about your desperate attempts to trap him with a pregnancy. It's honestly pathetic how predictable you are. Read it, I said quietly. I don't need to read anything. You're delusional if you think. Read it. My voice carried a note of authority that surprised us both. Trust me, you'll want to understand what you're really dealing with. Something in my tone must have penetrated her arrogance because she picked up the paper. I watched her eyes scan the legal language, saw the exact moment when she reached the crucial clause about the trust fund. Her face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dawning understanding that drained the color from her cheeks. I stood up, placing exact change for my coffee on the table. The pie remained untouched. I'd lost my appetite weeks ago and today was no exception. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, Mila, I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. I'm sure you and Nolan will have a very interesting conversation. I walked toward the exit without looking back, but I could feel her eyes burning into my back. The door chimed as I stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, and I couldn't resist glancing through the large front window. Mila was hunched over the document, her perfect posture completely forgotten. She was reading it again, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling Nolan, demanding explanations for things she'd never thought to question before. Her confident smile was gone, replaced by the kind of frown that comes with realizing you've been playing a game where someone else knew all the rules. I drove home slowly, savoring the image of her bent over that piece of paper, finally understanding that the pathetic wife she'd been tormenting for months had just shown her exactly who held the real power. I didn't have to wait long to see the ripple effects of my revelation. That evening, as I sat in my garden watering the tomato plants I'd been nurturing all summer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Mila. We need to talk. Call me. I deleted the message without responding. She'd had her chance to talk at Murphy's diner. Now she could experience the same helplessness I'd felt during those months of cruel phone calls, reaching out to someone who had no interest in answering. 20 minutes later, another text. I know you're getting these. Answer your phone. Then another. We both know you're not as innocent as you pretend to be. I turned my phone face down and continued watering my plants. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was nurturing life while her world was probably falling apart somewhere across town. My neighbor, Mrs. Chin, looked over the fence with concern. Everything all right, dear? You seem distracted. Just enjoying the quiet, I said, which was true. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't ringing with scheduled cruelty. The real fireworks began the next day. I was having lunch with my sister Rachel when Nolan called, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Chloe, we need to talk. Can you come home? Now. I'm having lunch with Rachel. What's wrong? Just, please, come home. The desperation in his voice was something I'd never heard before, not even during our worst fights. Rachel raised an eyebrow as I gathered my purse. Trouble in paradise? Something like that. I kissed her cheek goodbye. I'll call you later. The drive home felt like traveling toward a storm I'd been watching build on the horizon for months. I found Nolan pacing in our living room like a caged animal, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been tugging at it. She knows, he said without preamble. Mila knows about the pregnancy. I see. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one by the window where I'd spent so many evenings reading while he claimed to be working late. How did she find out? Did you tell her? His eyes were wild, searching my face for answers. We had coffee yesterday. I kept my voice conversational, almost casual. He stopped pacing. You what? She thought she was meeting you. Murphy's Diner, 2 o'clock. She seemed quite disappointed when I showed up instead. The color drained from his face. Chloe, what did you do? I told her the truth. About the baby. About your father's will. I watched him carefully, noting how his hands trembled slightly. She didn't take it well. Nolan sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. She's been calling me nonstop. Demanding explanations. She found some lawyer, started asking questions about inheritance law. Smart woman. Almost meant it. What did you tell her? What could I tell her? She already knew everything. He looked up at me, and for the first time in our marriage I saw genuine fear in his eyes. She asked me if the pregnancy was real. I couldn't lie to her, not when she was staring at a legal document. The admission hung between us. He'd confirmed my pregnancy to his mistress before even acknowledging it with me. And then, I prompted. She started connecting dots I never wanted her to see. His voice cracked slightly. She asked about your first pregnancy, about why I was so desperate to prevent this one. She's not stupid, Chloe. She figured out what happened before. There was the moment when his carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. She said you told her I'd had desperate attempts to trap you with pregnancy. Is that really how you described our lost baby to her? Nolan's silence was answer enough. She asked me what I meant when I said I'd handle the situation like before. The words came out in a rush, like a confession he couldn't hold back anymore. I didn't realize how it sounded until she repeated it back to me. I imagined the scene. Mila's growing horror as she realized the man she'd been sleeping with had sabotaged his own wife's pregnancy. The man she thought was romantic and passionate was actually calculating and cruel. What else did she say? She called me a monster. He laughed bitterly. Said she'd been mocking the wrong woman all along. That you'd played her like a chess piece while she thought she was the one in control. Pride swelled in my chest, surprising me with its intensity. Even in her anger and disgust, Mila had recognized the truth. I'd outmaneuvered them both. She's done with me, Nolan continued. Blocked my number, returned everything I ever gave her. Her last text. He pulled out his phone, read from the screen with a hollow voice. You made me waste 8 months on a woman who was always 3 steps ahead of both of us. The text was even more cutting than I'd hoped. Mila hadn't just rejected him, she'd made sure he knew exactly why. She'd seen through his manipulation and found it pathetic rather than charming. The worst part, Nolan said, his voice barely above a whisper, is that everyone's going to know. She's already told people at her office, her friends. She's not keeping this quiet. I'd expected this. Mila's pride had been wounded, her intelligence insulted. Of course she'd want people to know she hadn't been the naive other woman. She'd been outsmarted by the wife everyone thought was weak. Over the following days the social fallout became apparent. Nolan came home each evening looking more defeated, reporting on conversations with mutual friends who'd heard Mila's version of events. Brad asked me if it was true that I'd been messing with your head during the affair, Nolan said one night, staring into his untouched dinner. Sarah's wife heard I'd been manipulative and controlling. The narrative was shifting. Instead of being seen as a man torn between 2 women, Nolan was being viewed as someone who'd been dishonest with both. Mila's version painted him not as a romantic figure but as a manipulator who'd used and deceived everyone around him. Janet from your office called, I mentioned casually. Mila's putting in for a transfer. Apparently she can't stand to be in the same city anymore. His fork clattered against his plate. She's leaving. Phoenix office. Some kind of promotion opportunity. I'd done my research, called Janet myself to confirm the details. She starts next month. The news seemed to devastate him more than anything else. Not only had Mila rejected him, but she was erasing any possibility of reconciliation by putting 2,000 miles between them. She told Janet something interesting, I continued. Said she'd learned an important lesson about not underestimating quiet women. That sometimes the person you think is powerless is actually the one holding all the cards. Nolan's face crumpled. I've lost everything, haven't I? Not everything, I said quietly. You still have choices to make. But we both knew the truth. His carefully constructed double life had collapsed in a matter of days. The woman he'd thought was desperate and pathetic had orchestrated his downfall with surgical precision. And the mistress who'd made him feel powerful and desired now saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating your opponent. Mila's departure was swift and final. No dramatic confrontations, no attempts to win him back. She simply vanished from our lives as efficiently as she'd entered them, leaving behind only the wreckage of Nolan's ego and the grudging respect I felt for a woman who'd been smart enough to recognize when she'd been outplayed. The phone calls stopped completely. The evening torture sessions that had defined my life for months were over, replaced by a silence that felt like victory. I'd won, but more importantly, I taught them both a lesson they'd never forget. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you think you're winning right up until the moment you realize you've already lost. The weeks following Mila's departure settled into a strange rhythm. Nolan moved through our house like a ghost, appearing at mealtimes with hollow eyes and mechanical politeness. He'd ask about my day, comment on the weather, offer to help with dishes, all while carefully avoiding any mention of the pregnancy that was becoming impossible to hide. I was 12 weeks along now, and the morning sickness had given way to a small but noticeable bump that I no longer bothered to conceal. I'd catch him staring sometimes, his eyes lingering on my changing body with an expression I couldn't quite read. Longing? Regret? Fear? Perhaps all three. On a Thursday evening in late September, exactly 3 weeks after Mila had sent her final devastating text, I was arranging the baby books I'd bought earlier that day when I heard footsteps on our front porch. Not Nolan's usual confident stride, but something hesitant, almost shuffling. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:43 p.m. The same time Mila used to call with her carefully timed cruelty. I opened the door to find my husband standing there like a stranger asking for shelter. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his face had taken on the gaunt appearance of someone who'd forgotten how to sleep properly. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it compulsively. Chloe. His voice cracked on my name. Can we talk? I stepped aside without a word, and he entered our home like he was walking into foreign territory. He paused in the entryway, his eyes taking in the small changes I'd made. The pregnancy books on the coffee table, the prenatal vitamin bottle on the kitchen counter, the What to Expect magazine folded open to an article about second trimester nutrition. You look. He stopped himself, seeming to realize that commenting on my appearance might not be wise given recent history. Different. I supplied. Pregnant. Healthy. Each word was deliberately chosen, a reminder of what he'd tried to prevent. Beautiful, he said quietly. You look beautiful. I led him to the living room, settling into my usual chair while he remained standing, fidgeting with his car keys like a nervous teenager. I've been staying at the extended stay off Highway 12, he said without preamble. 3 weeks now. Giving you space, trying to figure out how to fix this. The information surprised me. I'd assumed he was still sleeping in our guest room, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. The fact that he'd been living in a hotel suggested a level of self-awareness I hadn't credited him with. Have you figured it out? I asked. His laugh was hollow, self-deprecating. No. Not even close. He finally sat down, perching on the edge of the couch like he might flee at any moment. But I know I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. The baby, I mean. Our baby. Hi baby, I corrected gently. You made your feelings about children quite clear. He flinched. Chloe, I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just about Mila, but about what I did to you. To our first baby. The words hung in the air between us. This was the first time he'd acknowledged his role in my miscarriage directly, without euphemisms or deflection. I was selfish. Controlling. I thought I could manage everything, keep everything exactly the way I wanted it. Tears were streaming down his face now, and I was surprised to find that they affected me more than I'd expected. I didn't realize what I was destroying until it was too late. What changed? I asked. 3 weeks ago you were still lying to both of us. What's different now? He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so vulnerable it was almost painful to watch. Losing Mila wasn't what broke me. It was realizing she was right, that you'd been 3 steps ahead of me the entire time. That while I thought I was so clever keeping secrets and managing situations, you knew everything. Not everything, I said honestly. I didn't know about the herbs until much later. His face crumpled. How did you find out? I told him about Dr. Martinez, about finding the bottle in our kitchen, about the months of silence that followed. I watched him absorb each detail, saw the moment when he truly understood the depth of what he'd done. You've known for months, he whispered. All this time you knew what I did and you never said anything. What would you have wanted me to say? I don't know. Scream at me. Hit me. Something other than this. He gestured vaguely at my calm demeanor. How can you just sit there and talk about it like we're discussing the weather? Because screaming wouldn't bring our baby back, I said simply. And it wouldn't protect this one. He was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of my words. Is that what all this was about? The coffee with Mila, showing her the will, was it all about protecting this pregnancy? Partly. I placed my hand on my small bump, a gesture that drew his eyes immediately. But it was also about taking back control of my own life. I want to be part of it, he said suddenly. This pregnancy, the baby's life. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. The request didn't surprise me. I'd been expecting it since the moment Mila left. But the timing felt significant. He was asking on a Thursday evening at the exact time his mistress used to call to torment me. Whether intentional or not, it felt like he was trying to reclaim that hour, to fill it with something better than the cruelty it had once held. I have a doctor's appointment next Tuesday, I said carefully. 16-week checkup. We might be able to learn the gender. Hope flickered in his eyes. Would you let me come with you? I studied his face, noting the way he held his breath while waiting for my answer. Why should I? Because I want to be better. I want to be the father this baby deserves, the husband you deserved all along. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been rehearsing them. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can do better going forward. What does better look like to you? I asked. He seemed unprepared for the question. Honesty. No more secrets. No more trying to control everything. And if the baby changes our financial situation? If the trust activates and I become the manager of assets you consider yours? His jaw tightened. A flash of the old Nolan, the one who viewed everything in terms of control and ownership. But then he forced his expression to relax. Then we figure it out together. As partners. Partners, I repeated. Is that what we were when you were slipping herbs into my tea? No. The word came out flat, defeated. We weren't partners. I was a manipulator and you were someone I was trying to control instead of love. The admission was more honest than anything he'd said in years of marriage. It also highlighted exactly why I couldn't simply forgive and forget. I'll think about the appointment, I said finally. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. Over the following days, Nolan began what could only be described as a campaign to prove his worthiness. He brought groceries without being asked, left prenatal vitamins on my nightstand, researched the best pediatricians in our area. When I mentioned that I'd signed up for a birthing class, he asked, tentatively, if I'd consider letting him attend. But for every gesture of consideration, I felt the weight of everything that had come before. The herbs hidden behind his vitamins. The months of phone calls while he said nothing. The way he'd described me to his mistress as boring, demanding, desperate. Some wounds were too deep for grand gestures to heal. Some trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt with good intentions and prenatal vitamins. Still, I found myself softening in small ways. When he asked about the birthing class, I told him I'd consider it. When he offered to help set up the nursery, I didn't immediately refuse. Not because I was ready to forgive him, but because I was beginning to understand the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I could forgive him for my own peace of mind. But trusting him with my heart again? That was a different conversation entirely. That conversation about forgiveness versus trust became the foundation for everything that followed. Over the next few months, as my pregnancy progressed and our daughter grew stronger inside me, I made decisions that prioritized my peace over Nolan's comfort, my future over his regrets. The birth itself was transformational in ways I hadn't expected. As I held our daughter for the first time, Emma Rose, named after my grandmother, I felt something click into place. This tiny person with her perfectly formed fingers and serious dark eyes represented everything I'd fought for. Not just the pregnancy itself but my right to make choices about my own life. Nolan was there, had been throughout the labor, holding my hand when I let him, stepping back when I needed space. When Emma was placed in my arms, I saw him cry, real tears, not the calculated emotion of his campaign to win me back, but genuine overwhelm at meeting his daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered, his finger tracing her tiny hand. "Yes," I agreed. "She is." But even in that moment of shared wonder, I knew our family would look different than the one I'd once imagined. The trust activated automatically upon Emma's birth, just as William had designed it. Within weeks, I was managing a rental property that generated enough monthly income to cover Emma's future education expenses. The stock portfolio provided additional security, and my 40% stake in Foster & Sons Hardware meant I now had a voice in business decisions that affected our financial future. Nolan watched this transfer of power with a complex mix of emotions: pride in his daughter, grief for what he'd lost, and a grudging respect for his father's foresight. He never once challenged the arrangements, perhaps understanding that any attempt to contest his father's will would only highlight his own manipulation and greed. 6 months after Emma's birth, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I enrolled in business management courses at the community college, taking advantage of their evening program while Nolan watched Emma during his scheduled visits. "You're going back to school?" my sister Rachel asked during one of our weekly coffee dates. "At 35 with a new baby? Why not?" I bounced Emma gently in my arms, marveling at how natural motherhood felt despite everything that had led to it. The trust provides financial stability, and I finally have the freedom to pursue something for myself. The freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, I was making choices based purely on what I wanted, not what someone else expected or demanded. I studied marketing and accounting, learned about property management and investment strategies. Knowledge became another form of independence. Nolan and I settled into a co-parenting arrangement that worked because I controlled every aspect of it. He saw Emma twice a week, Tuesday evenings and Saturday afternoons, plus every other weekend. The schedule was my design, implemented on my timeline with boundaries I enforced consistently. "I'd like to take her to the park this Saturday," he might suggest during one of our brief handoff conversations. "Which park?" I'd ask. "The one on Elm Street with the good playground. Be back by 4. She has a routine." He never argued, never pushed for more time or different arrangements. Perhaps he understood that cooperation was the only path to any relationship with his daughter. Perhaps he'd finally learned that my boundaries weren't suggestions. The business courses led to unexpected opportunities. Professor Martinez, coincidentally sharing a name with the doctor who'd helped me discover Nolan's deception, mentioned that Foster & Sons Hardware was looking for someone to modernize their marketing approach. "You own part of that business, don't you?" she asked after class one evening. 40%, I confirmed. "Have you considered getting more involved? Bringing some fresh perspectives to their operations?" The idea hadn't occurred to me, but once planted, it grew quickly. I scheduled a meeting with the current manager, brought proposals for online sales platforms and social media marketing, suggested efficiency improvements based on what I'd learned about small business operations. Within 6 months, I was working part-time as Foster & Sons marketing and operations consultant. The additional income wasn't necessary. The trust provided more than enough security, but the work gave me purpose and professional identity I'd never had during my marriage. Nolan heard about my involvement through the family grapevine. When he brought Emma back from a Saturday visit, he lingered longer than usual. "I heard you're working at the hardware store now," he said, his tone carefully neutral. 3 days a week. Emma comes with me sometimes. She likes watching the customers." That's great, Chloe. Really. Dad would have loved seeing you take an active role in the business." It was one of the few times he'd mentioned his father without bitterness, and I recognized it as genuine. Whatever resentment he felt about the trust, he seemed to understand that his father's decision had been protective rather than punitive. The personal growth extended beyond professional achievements. I learned to speak up in situations where the old Chloe would have remained silent. When Emma's pediatrician suggested a treatment approach I disagreed with, I voiced my concerns and sought a second opinion. When a neighbor made comments about single mothers that felt judgmental, I corrected his assumptions about my situation with polite firmness. "You've changed," Rachel observed during one of our coffee dates, watching me confidently handle a difficult server who'd gotten our order wrong. "Have I?" I shifted Emma to my other arm, noting how natural the movement had become. The old Chloe would have just accepted the wrong order and pretended it was fine. He was right. The woman who'd silently endured months of cruel phone calls was gone, replaced by someone who understood that peace didn't require accepting mistreatment. Even my relationship with Emma carried lessons about power and choice. When she cried inconsolably during her colicky phase, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set firm boundaries. Putting her in her crib for 5 minutes while I collected myself, rather than letting frustration build to dangerous levels. "You're a natural at this," Nolan said one evening when he picked her up and she immediately calmed in his arms. "I'm learning," I corrected. "There's a difference." The distinction mattered. Natural implied some innate ability, but learning suggested conscious choice and effort. Everything about my new life had been learned, chosen, deliberately constructed rather than simply accepted. 18 months after Emma's birth, I had occasion to drive past Murphy's diner. The same red vinyl booths were visible through the windows, the same checkered floor that had witnessed my confrontation with Mila. But instead of painful memories, I felt only quiet satisfaction. That afternoon had been the beginning of everything, not just Mila's downfall or Nolan's consequences, but my own transformation. The moment I'd slid that will across the table, I'd stopped being a victim and started being the author of my own story. Through mutual acquaintances, I'd learned that Mila had indeed married, to a divorced architect in Phoenix who apparently appreciated her intelligence and ambition. Good for her. Everyone deserved a chance at happiness, even someone who'd once taken pleasure in causing pain. I rarely thought about her anymore except when something reminded me of that time, like driving past Murphy's or hearing a phone ring at 7:43 p.m. Those moments served as reminders of how far I'd traveled, not as sources of ongoing anger. Emma babbled from her car seat as we passed the diner, pointing at something outside her window with the serious concentration of a 15-month-old making important observations about the world. "That's right, sweetheart," I said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "There's a lot to see out there." And there was. A life I'd built through patience and strategic thinking rather than drama and revenge. A future that belonged entirely to us, free from the toxic patterns that had once defined my daily existence. The woman who'd once listened silently to cruelty was gone. In her place was someone who spoke up, who made choices, who protected what mattered most. Someone who understood that true power wasn't about controlling others. It was about never again allowing others to control you. If this story of strategic revenge had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Chloe slid that will across the table, watching Mila's confidence crumble completely. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Amelia Thompson, 34, and I never thought I'd see my sister Natalie's face drain of color like that. The lawyer's office fell completely silent as Mr. Harrington slid the yellowed document across the mahogany table. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "My father's will, the real one, lay exposed after 20 years of deception." My mother gripped her designer purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "There must be some mistake," Natalie whispered. "But we all knew. The empire my parents had signed over to my sister wasn't hers to claim. If you're watching this and know what it feels like when family betrayal hits you right in the chest, you're not alone." I still remember that moment like it was yesterday, my entire world shifting on its axis as family secrets came tumbling out. While I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments and hit that like button if you've ever discovered a family secret that changed everything. Trust me, what happened next in that lawyer's office is something you won't want to miss. It all started with an unexpected phone call 6 months earlier. I was in my small studio apartment, working on a presentation for the museum exhibition I was curating, when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Margaret Thompson rarely called me these days, so I immediately knew something significant was happening. "Amelia, darling," she said, her voice carrying that practiced elegance she'd perfected over decades of country club luncheons. "Your father and I need you to come to the house this weekend. Family meeting. It's important." Before I could ask questions, she'd already hung up. That was typical of Margaret. Always efficient, never wasting time on unnecessary pleasantries, especially with me. Growing up as the daughter of Richard Thompson meant living in luxury, but emotional scarcity. My father had built Thompson Construction from a small local contractor into a regional powerhouse worth millions. Our family mansion sat on 5 acres in the wealthiest neighborhood in town, a monument to my father's success and ambition. But inside those walls, warmth was in short supply. From the beginning, it was clear that Natalie, my sister 4 years my senior, was the apple of our father's eye. While I showed interest in art and literature, Natalie shadowed our father from an early age, absorbing his business acumen and mirroring his ruthless approach to negotiations. By the time she was in high school, she was already sitting in on business meetings. I was busy sketching in my room, trying to ignore the sound of my father's proud laughter at something clever Natalie had said. "Natalie understands what it takes to build a legacy," my father would say at dinner parties, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder. I would become suddenly invisible, my straight-A report cards and art competition trophies meaningless in the shadow of Natalie's business potential. When I chose to major in art history at college, my father barely concealed his disappointment. "4 years wasted on learning about dead painters," he muttered when I announced my decision. My mother, always the diplomat, simply smiled tightly and said, "Well, I suppose every family needs someone with cultural awareness." I'd created distance after college, moving 40 minutes away to work at the city's art museum. I visited for obligatory holidays and birthdays, enduring the subtle jabs and dismissive glances. My coping mechanism was to remain poised and detached, never giving them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. As I drove up the long, winding driveway to my parents' estate that Saturday, I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. The sprawling Georgian mansion loomed ahead, its perfectly manicured gardens and gleaming windows projecting wealth and perfection. I parked my modest Honda next to Natalie's Mercedes SUV, the contrast between our vehicles a perfect metaphor for our places in the family hierarchy. The housekeeper, Isabel, greeted me at the door with a warm smile, one of the few genuine ones I ever received in that house. "There in the dining room, Miss Amelia," she whispered, giving my hand a quick squeeze. Isabel had always shown me more maternal affection than my own mother. The formal dining room was intimidating by design, with its 20-foot ceilings, crystal chandelier, and imposing mahogany table that could seat 20. Today, just 4 places were set, with my father at the head of the table, naturally. My mother sat to his right, Natalie to his left. I took my place at the far end, physically and symbolically distant. "Amelia, you're looking bohemian," my mother commented, eyeing my simple blouse and jeans with thinly veiled disapproval. At 62, Margaret Thompson remained immaculately preserved through rigorous beauty regimens, designer clothing, and the occasional discreet cosmetic procedure. "Thanks for coming, sis," Natalie said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked every inch the corporate air in her tailored pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Where I had inherited our mother's softer features, Natalie had our father's sharp jawline and penetrating gaze. Dinner was a tense affair of forced small talk about the weather and local gossip. Only after the dessert plates were cleared did my father clear his throat, signaling the real purpose of this gathering. "As you know," he began, folding his hands on the table, "I've built Thompson Construction from nothing into a $75 million enterprise. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. I've been considering the future of our family legacy for some time now. My mother reached over to pat his hand supportively. I noticed her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light. Another recent gift, no doubt. Your mother and I have decided it's time to make the transition official, my father continued. We've signed over all our assets, the company, this house, our investment portfolios, everything, to Natalie. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Though I'd always known Natalie would likely inherit the business, the totality of the decision. Everything hit me like a slap. I see, I said, working to keep my voice steady. May I ask why this decision is being made now? My mother jumped in, her voice taking on that condescending tone she reserved for explaining things to people she considered intellectually inferior. Darling, you've chosen a different path. You've never shown interest in the business, and frankly, you lack the temperament for this industry. Your artistic sensibilities are lovely, but they don't translate to managing a construction empire. We need someone with business acumen, my father added bluntly. Someone who understands numbers, strategy, and leadership. This isn't about favoritism, Amelia. It's about what's best for the family legacy. I looked at Natalie, who had the decency to attempt a sympathetic expression, though I could see the triumph in her eyes. Don't worry, Amelia, she said sweetly. I'll make sure you're always taken care of. Maybe we can find you a role in the company's charitable foundation or something. Organizing art programs for underprivileged children, perhaps. The condescension in her voice made my teeth clench. I have a career, Natalie. I don't need a pity position. Now, Amelia, my mother admonished, there's no need for that tone. We're trying to be practical. Your lifestyle choices. My lifestyle choices? I interrupted, unable to contain myself. You mean my choice to pursue education and a career I'm passionate about? My father's face hardened. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This emotional reaction. Business requires rationality and strategic thinking. The decision is made, papers signed. We're simply informing you as a courtesy. I took a deep breath, refusing to give them the satisfaction of an outburst. Thank you for the courtesy, I said evenly. Is there anything else I should know? They exchanged glances, clearly surprised by my composed reaction. They'd expected tears, pleading, perhaps even a scene. My refusal to provide the drama they'd anticipated seemed to unsettle them more than any tantrum could have. That's all, my father said curtly. You're welcome to stay the night if you'd like. Thank you, but I need to get back to the city. I have work tomorrow. I stood, smoothing my napkin beside my plate. Congratulations, Natalie. I'm sure you'll run the company exactly as father would. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but Natalie beamed nonetheless. Thank you, Amelia. That means a lot. I excused myself and left the dining room with my head held high. Only when I reached my car did I allow the first tear to fall. I drove away from my childhood home that night feeling a strange mix of hurt and relief. The hurt was obvious. Being so clearly deemed unworthy by my own parents stung no matter how expected it was. But the relief surprised me. There was something freeing about having the inequality so clearly stated, so officially documented. At least now there were no more illusions to maintain, no more hope to be crushed. 6 months passed after that fateful family dinner. I threw myself into my work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I'd recently been promoted to assistant curator of the American wing. My modest one-bedroom apartment in the city couldn't have been more different from the Thompson family mansion. Instead of crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs, I had IKEA furniture and prints of my favorite paintings. But it was mine, earned through my own merit and hard work. You're killing it with this new exhibition, my colleague and closest friend Gabriella said one afternoon as we cataloged artifacts for an upcoming display. The director practically gushed about your concept at the board meeting. Gabriella had been my rock since college. She knew the whole sordid story of my family dynamics and never failed to remind me of my worth when memories of parental disappointment crept in. Thanks, Gabby, I smiled, carefully placing a delicate porcelain piece in its protective casing. It's nice to be appreciated for my actual skills for once. Speaking of appreciation, she waggled her eyebrows suggestively. How are things with Marcus? He called the office looking for you yesterday. Marcus was a corporate attorney I'd been dating for about 3 months. We'd met at a museum fundraiser, and I'd been drawn to his intelligence and the fact that he seemed genuinely interested in my passion for art history. But lately, things had been complicated. I don't know, I sighed. He's great, but he's getting too close and you're pulling away, Gabriella finished for me. Classic Amelia Thompson defense mechanism. He says I have trust issues. I admitted. Gee, I wonder why, Gabriella replied sarcastically. Could it be because your family treated you like an afterthought your entire life? The truth was Marcus had started noticing my tendency to keep people at arm's length. Just last week, he'd commented that I seemed to be waiting for him to disappoint me, as if disappointment was inevitable. He wasn't wrong. Growing up, disappointment had been my constant companion. I remembered Natalie's extravagant Sweet 16 party, where my parents rented out an entire country club and hired a popular local band. When my 16th birthday came around 4 years later, I received a card with a check and an excuse about my father being away on business. Then there was Natalie's wedding 3 years ago, a 3-day affair covered by local society pages. I wasn't included in most of the family photos. My mother claimed it was because my dress color didn't coordinate with the scheme. I stood on the periphery, while Natalie was literally and figuratively centered in our family narrative. Even my college graduation, where I received magna cum laude honors, was overshadowed by Natalie closing a major deal for the company. My parents attended my ceremony, but spent most of the time on their phones, my father periodically stepping out to take important calls about Natalie's negotiation. My phone buzzed, interrupting my reminiscing. Natalie's name flashed on the screen. I considered ignoring it, but knew she'd just keep calling. Hello, Natalie. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Amelia. Just checking in on my baby sister, she chirped, her voice dripping with the false sweetness she'd perfected over the years. You'll never believe the deal we just closed. $30 million for the Henderson project. Daddy's over the moon. We're celebrating by taking the company jet to Aspen this weekend. This was typical Natalie, calling under the pretense of sisterly connection but really just to flaunt her success and position. She never asked about my work or life. That's nice, I replied flatly. I'm actually in the middle of something important at work, so… Oh, right, your little museum job, she interrupted with a laugh. Well, don't work too hard arranging those dusty paintings. Oh, and Mom wanted me to remind you about her birthday dinner next month. Try to dress appropriately this time, okay? After hanging up, I sat in silent frustration. Even now, with everything officially signed over to her, Natalie couldn't resist twisting the knife. I checked my bank account. Another month of careful budgeting ahead. My salary was respectable for my field, but in an expensive city with student loans still to pay off, there wasn't much left for luxuries. My phone pinged with a news alert, another habit I couldn't break, following news about Thompson Construction. The headline read, Thompson Construction expands west. CEO Richard Thompson and heir apparent Natalie Thompson acquire major California contractor. The accompanying photo showed my father and sister cutting a ribbon at some ceremony, both beaming with identical expressions of triumph. My mother stood slightly behind them, the perfect corporate wife in her St. John's suit and pearls. I tossed my phone aside and tried to focus on the exhibition layout I'd been working on. This was my world now. Art, history, preservation. I'd built a life that had meaning to me, even if my family couldn't see its value. The following month, I dutifully attended my mother's birthday dinner at an exclusive restaurant downtown. I'd spent more than I should have on a tasteful silver bracelet for her, carefully gift-wrapped with a handwritten card. How thoughtful, my mother said dismissively, barely glancing at the bracelet before setting it aside. Minutes later, when Natalie presented her with a diamond necklace, my mother gasped in delight. Oh, Natalie, it's absolutely exquisite. Richard, look what your daughter got me. Your daughter. Not our daughter or even Natalie. Just your daughter, as if I didn't exist or didn't merit the same familial connection. By the time dessert arrived, I'd been effectively rendered invisible, the conversation revolving entirely around company matters and Natalie's recent achievements. I excused myself early, citing work the next morning. "Always running off," my mother commented. "No wonder you're still single." I bit back a retort and simply kissed her cheek. "Happy birthday, Mom." Outside, in the cool night air, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I'd created a good life despite them, not because of them. I had meaningful work, true friends, and my integrity intact. I was finally reaching a place of emotional distance that felt healthy rather than defensive. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small part of me still yearned for the validation I'd never received, still wondered what it would take for my parents to see me, really see me just once. 3 weeks after my mother's birthday dinner, I was cataloging a collection of early American silverware when my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized the area code for my hometown. "Hello, Amelia Thompson speaking," I answered professionally. "Miss Thompson, this is Edgar Harrington from Harrington, Winters and Associates," came a formal voice I vaguely recognized. "I'm your family's attorney." My heart skipped a beat. Had something happened to my parents? Despite everything, the thought sent a jolt of concern through me. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harrington?" I asked, stepping away from my desk. "Yes, well, physically everyone is fine," he replied cryptically. "However, a matter has arisen that requires your presence. I need you to come to my office at your earliest convenience. Tomorrow, if possible." "What's this regarding?" I pressed, suspicion replacing concern. There was a pause on the line. "I'm afraid I can't discuss the details over the phone, Miss Thompson, but I assure you, it's of significant importance to you personally." After ending the call, I sat staring at my phone, puzzled and slightly unnerved. Harrington had been my family's lawyer for decades. The last time I'd seen him was when I signed some tax documents after college graduation, and before that, rarely except at occasional family functions. "Everything okay?" Gabriella asked, poking her head into my office. I filled her in on the strange call, my confusion evident. "You have to go," she said immediately. "This sounds serious, Amelia. What did he mean by irregularities in family documentation?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "But I've got the Wilson exhibition opening next week. I can't just drop everything for another family drama." Gabriella gave me a knowing look. "Can't? Or won't, because you're afraid of getting hurt again." I sighed, knowing she was right.
Fine.
"I'll take tomorrow off and catch the morning train." "Good," she nodded approvingly. "And call me the second you find out what this is about."
I'm intrigued.
The next morning, I boarded the 7:15 train to my hometown. As the landscape shifted from urban sprawl to rolling suburbs, I found myself traveling back in time as well, memories flooding in with each passing mile. There was the park where my father had taught Natalie to play softball while I watched from the bench. The ice cream shop where we'd go after school. Natalie always allowed 2 scoops while I was limited to 1 because you need to watch your figure, Amelia. The community theater where I'd starred in the school play, my parents attending only because Natalie had designed the costumes as part of her well-rounded college application. By the time the train pulled into the station, I'd worked myself into a familiar emotional state. A mixture of resentment, resignation, and that stubborn, desperate hope that maybe this time would be different. Harrington's law office occupied the entire top floor of one of the oldest buildings downtown. The elevator opened to reveal a reception area that seemed frozen in time, dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books lining the walls, and furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary. It screamed old money and tradition, perfectly reflecting the clients it served. "Miss Thompson," the elderly receptionist greeted me with a polite nod. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Benjamin will show you to the conference room." Benjamin turned out to be an elderly clerk who must have been with the firm for decades. As he led me down the hallway, he gave me a curious, sidelong glance. "Been a while since we've seen you here, Miss Thompson," he commented. "Yes, well, I don't usually have much need for legal services," I replied politely. He hummed thoughtfully. Interesting times at the firm lately. Been going through old storage, finding all sorts of things. Before I could ask what he meant, he opened a heavy door to reveal a spacious conference room. Mr. Harrington will be with you shortly. Left alone, I wandered around the room, examining the framed photographs of local landmarks and distinguished-looking men who I assumed were partners past and present. On one wall hung a collection of family portraits. Prominent clients, I guessed. My eyes were drawn to a faded photograph of a Thompson family gathering, taken before I was born. My father, looking remarkably young, stood beside my grandfather Abraham, both wearing suits and serious expressions. The door opened, and Edgar Harrington entered. At 70-something, he remained imposing, tall, silver-haired, with penetrating blue eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. "Miss Thompson, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Your call was quite mysterious, Mr. Harrington," I replied. "I'm curious to know what couldn't be discussed over the phone." He gestured for me to sit, then took his place at the head of the table, arranging a folder of documents before him. "As I mentioned, we've been doing some extensive archival organization," he began. "Last week, our clerks discovered a sealed envelope in deep storage that had been overlooked for many years. It contained documents pertaining to your grandfather Abraham Thompson's estate." I frowned, confused. My grandfather died over 20 years ago. Why would that be relevant now? "The documents relate to the inheritance of the family construction business," Harrington continued carefully. "More specifically, they contain provisions about who is entitled to control the company that apparently were never properly executed." My confusion deepened. "But the company belongs to my father. And now to Natalie, I suppose." Harrington removed his glasses, polishing them slowly, a gesture that seemed designed to buy time. "That's what we need to discuss. But I believe it would be best to do so with all relevant parties present. I've called a meeting for tomorrow morning. Your parents and sister will be attending." "Mr. Harrington," I said, leaning forward, "I've taken time off work and traveled here based on your insistence that this matter is important to me personally. I'd appreciate at least some indication of what this is about." He sighed, replacing his glasses. "Very well. The documents suggest that the ownership structure of Thompson Construction may not be what everyone has believed for the past 2 decades. There are conditions attached to the inheritance that may have been overlooked or deliberately circumvented." "What kinds of conditions?" I pressed. "Bloodline conditions, Miss Thompson," he said gravely. "That's all I can say until tomorrow. The meeting is at 10 o'clock sharp." As I left the office, more confused than when I'd arrived, I noticed the receptionist watching me with an odd expression, almost like recognition mixed with surprise. I nodded politely and hurried to the elevator, my mind racing with possibilities. What could possibly be in my grandfather's will that would matter now, after all these years? And why did Harrington specifically need me present for this meeting? I checked into a downtown hotel, not wanting to stay at my parent house. After a restless night filled with strange dreams about family portraits where my face kept disappearing, I dressed carefully in a professional navy dress and blazer, armoring myself for whatever the day might bring. At precisely 9:55 the next morning, I walked back into Harrington's office, steeling myself for the family confrontation ahead. "I hope you're all still with me. This meeting would change everything, not just for me, but for my entire family." If you've ever had that moment where you knew your life was about to take a dramatic turn, drop a comment below. I'm about to share what happened when I walked into that conference room and saw my family's faces, and trust me, you won't believe what the lawyer revealed next. The tension in the conference room was palpable when I arrived. My father sat at one end of the table, looking unusually pale and drawn. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him, his once imposing frame now seeming almost fragile in his expensive suit. My mother perched beside him, her posture rigid, fingers nervously adjusting her pearl necklace. Natalie sat across from them, impeccably dressed in a power suit, tapping her manicured nails impatiently on the polished table. Finally, Natalie muttered as I entered, checking her Rolex. "Some of us have companies to run." I ignored her jab and took a seat at the opposite end of the table from my father. "Good morning," I said neutrally, nodding to my parents. My mother barely acknowledged me, while my father gave a curt nod. The family dynamics were on full display even before a word was spoken. Natalie, the impatient heir, my parents united in their obvious discomfort, and me, the outsider. The door opened, and Edgar Harrington entered, followed by a younger man carrying several file boxes. "Thank you all for coming," Harrington began, settling at the head of the table. "As I've informed you individually, we've discovered documents of significant importance regarding the Thompson family estate and business holdings." "This is highly irregular, Edgar," my father interrupted, his voice lacking its usual authoritative boom. "Whatever administrative oversight you've found can surely be corrected without this theatrical gathering." Harrington remained unperturbed. "I'm afraid not, Richard. This goes beyond administrative oversight." He opened a folder and extracted a yellowed document. "This is an addendum to Abraham Thompson's will, dated 1978, regarding the inheritance of Thompson Construction." My mother shifted uncomfortably. Abraham's will was executed 23 years ago when he passed. The company went to Richard, as was always intended. "That was the understanding, yes," Harrington agreed. "However, this addendum changes things significantly." He adjusted his glasses. "To understand the implications, I need to provide some family history that may not be known to everyone present." He extracted another document. Thompson Construction wasn't actually started by Abraham Thompson, as many believe. The company began with capital from Richard's great-uncle Thomas Thompson, who died childless in 1962. Thomas left his considerable fortune and fledgling construction business to Abraham with very specific conditions. This was news to me. The family lore had always been that my grandfather built the company from nothing through sheer determination and grit. "What conditions?" Natalie asked sharply. Harrington cleared his throat. "According to these documents, great-uncle Thomas stipulated that the company must ultimately pass to the eldest female descendant with Thompson blood. He was apparently quite progressive for his time and believed women were underrepresented in business ownership." My father's face had turned an alarming shade of gray. My mother clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. "When Abraham inherited," Harrington continued, "he honored these wishes by adding this addendum to his own will, reinforcing that after his son Richard's stewardship, the company must pass to the eldest female Thompson by blood." Natalie laughed dismissively. "Well, that's clearly me. I'm the eldest daughter, and I've already been named successor. This changes nothing." "There's more," Harrington said gravely. Thomas was apparently concerned about potential attempts to circumvent his wishes. He added an unusual provision. Before the final transfer of company ownership, a DNA confirmation of Thompson bloodline would be required. The room fell silent. My mother abruptly stood. "This is absurd. We're leaving." "Margaret, sit down," my father said quietly, his authority momentarily reasserting itself. "Richard, we don't need to listen to this invasion of privacy," she hissed. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, as the family's legal counsel, I am obligated to disclose these findings," Harrington said firmly. "And there's one more document you should see." He nodded to his assistant, who produced a sealed hospital envelope. My father closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "During our investigation, we obtained these records from Mercy Hospital, dated August 1982, Harrington continued, his voice gentler now. "They pertain to Natalie's birth." "This is outrageous," my mother exclaimed. "How dare you access private medical records?" "They were included in a sealed packet with Abraham's addendum," Harrington explained. "He apparently had concerns and conducted his own investigation before his death." He slid the hospital document across the table. "These records indicate that Margaret Thompson was admitted in January 1982 following a miscarriage. 3 months later, in April 1982, adoption papers were filed for a newborn girl named Natalie." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Natalie stared at the document, her face draining of color. "That's not possible," she whispered. The DNA provision in Thomas's will wasn't arbitrary, Harrington continued softly. Abraham suspected that his granddaughter Natalie was adopted, not born, to Margaret and Richard Thompson. My head was spinning. Natalie, adopted? The perfect daughter, the chosen heir, the one who supposedly had all our father's best qualities, not biologically a Thompson at all? This can't be right. I finally managed, looking at my parents. Mom?
Dad.
My mother had collapsed back into her chair, silent tears streaming down her face. My father looked utterly defeated. It's true, he said finally, his voice barely audible. Natalie is adopted. Natalie made a strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. You told me I was born prematurely. You showed me birth pictures. Those were staged, my mother admitted, not meeting Natalie's eyes. We wanted you to feel like you were always ours. According to our records, Harrington continued gently, Amelia, born in 1990, is the only biological daughter of Richard and Margaret Thompson, and therefore the rightful heir to Thompson Construction under the terms set by Thomas Thompson and reinforced by Abraham Thompson. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze shift to me. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the implications too enormous to process immediately. This is ridiculous. Natalie suddenly exploded, standing so abruptly her chair toppled backward. I've worked for this company my entire life. I've earned my position. Some ancient paperwork and DNA technicality can't just erase that. Natalie, please, my father began, but she cut him off.
No.
This is a setup. She turned her fury toward me. You put him up to this, didn't you? Couldn't stand being the family disappointment, so you dug up some obscure clause to steal what's rightfully mine. I had no idea about any of this, I said truthfully, still struggling to process the revelation. Liar, she spat. You've always been jealous of me, always playing the victim while plotting behind our backs. She grabbed her designer bag and stormed toward the door. My lawyers will be in touch, Harrington. This isn't over. My mother hurried after her, pausing only briefly at the door. Richard, are you coming? My father remained seated, looking suddenly old and tired. Go comfort Natalie. I'll be along shortly. After they left, an uncomfortable silence descended on the conference room. Harrington excused himself tactfully, leaving me alone with my father. Did you know? I finally asked. All this time, did you know about the inheritance conditions? He nodded slowly. Abraham told me before he died. He showed me the documents, warned me that eventually the company would have to go to a female blood descendant. And you hid them, I said, not a question but a statement. We had already adopted Natalie by then, he explained, his voice hollow. We'd presented her as our biological child. The truth would have devastated her, destroyed our family. And then when you were born, you had a biological daughter who could have inherited. I finished for him. But instead of preparing me for that role, you pushed me away and groomed Natalie anyway. He looked at me directly, for perhaps the first time in years. Natalie showed interest. You didn't. You were always different, sensitive, artistic, not cut out for the cutthroat business world. You never gave me a chance, I said quietly. You decided who I was before I could even discover it for myself. Before he could respond, Harrington returned with additional paperwork. Miss Thompson, as the legal heir under the terms of these documents, you'll need to review these materials regarding the company's structure, assets, and transfer procedures. My father stood unsteadily. I should go check on Natalie and your mother. As he reached the door, I called after him. Dad? Why now? Why did these documents suddenly surface after 20 years? He paused, not turning around. I have cancer, Amelia. Terminal. 6 months, maybe less. I wanted to make sure Natalie was secure before. He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders and walked out without another word. I sat there, stunned by the cascade of revelations. In the span of an hour, I discovered my sister was adopted, my father was dying, and I was apparently the rightful heir to a company I knew almost nothing about. Harrington cleared his throat, bringing me back to the present moment. Miss Thompson, I understand this is overwhelming, but there are time-sensitive matters we need to address. Of course, I said automatically, years of emotional compartmentalization kicking in. Where do we start? I spent the next several hours reviewing documents, signing preliminary paperwork, and trying to absorb the fundamentals of a company I had never expected to be involved with. By the time I left Harrington's office late that afternoon, my head was spinning with information about assets, liabilities, organizational structures, and legal obligations. As I stepped into the crisp autumn air, my phone buzzed with a text from Gabriella. Well, what happened? I stared at the screen, not even knowing where to begin. How could I possibly explain that in one day, my entire understanding of my family and my place in it had been completely upended? I need to pause for a moment here because even now, years later, remembering that day still takes my breath away. Have you ever had your entire reality shift in an instant? That moment when everything you thought you knew suddenly looks completely different? If you're finding this story relatable or eye-opening so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me as I share these difficult family moments. I promise the next part of the story, what happened when I confronted my family at home, will show just how quickly a family can unravel when long-buried secrets come to light. I drove to my parents' estate in a daze, my mind still reeling from the revelations at Harrington's office. The family home looked the same as always, imposing, immaculate, cold. But now, like everything else in my life, it felt like I was seeing it through entirely new eyes. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed Natalie's Mercedes parked haphazardly near the entrance, one wheel on the perfectly manicured lawn, a small but telling sign of her emotional state. Natalie, who was typically meticulous about appearances, would never normally park so carelessly. Isabel opened the door before I could ring the bell, her kind face creased with worry. "Miss Amelia," she whispered, "it's been terrible." Shouting, crying. Miss Natalie broke a vase in the foyer. "Where are they now?" I asked, stepping inside. "Your mother took a sedative and is lying down. Miss Natalie stormed out to the pool house about 20 minutes ago. Your father is in his study." I thanked her and made my way through the silent house to my father's study. The heavy oak door was closed, but I knocked firmly and entered without waiting for a response. My father sat behind his massive desk, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. A glass of whiskey sat untouched by his hand. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "I suppose you have questions," he said wearily. "About 30 years' worth," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "Let's start with why you lied about Natalie being your biological daughter." He sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. "Your mother had 3 miscarriages before Natalie. The last one nearly broke her. The doctors said she'd never carried a term. We looked into adoption, but the waiting lists were years long." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. A business associate mentioned a private adoption opportunity. A young woman from out of state, unwanted pregnancy, wanted it handled discreetly. "So you took the baby and pretended she was yours," I said flatly. "We were going to tell her eventually," he insisted. "But the years passed, and it never seemed like the right time. And then when your mother surprisingly became pregnant with you, it complicated things." I finished for him. "Yes." He took a sip of whiskey. "By then, we'd been maintaining the fiction for years. And Natalie was so much like me, driven, ambitious, focused. It seemed natural that she would be my heir. Even though you knew about Great Uncle Thomas's conditions? Even though you knew eventually the truth would come out." He set down his glass with a sharp click. I thought I could find a way around it. I had the original documents sealed, filed amendments, created a corporate structure that would protect Natalie's position. And my grandfather knew? About Natalie being adopted? My father nodded slowly. He figured it out. Margaret and I claimed she was born prematurely, but Abraham was suspicious of the timing. He hired a private investigator before he died and left those sealed records with his will addendum. He laughed bitterly. He always was thorough. "So, why tell me now about your cancer? Is that even true? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Stage 4 pancreatic, he said simply. Diagnosed 3 months ago. That's why we accelerated the transfer of assets to Natalie. I thought I could secure her future before. He trailed off, then fixed me with an intense gaze. I never meant to hurt you, Amelia. I just wanted to protect the daughter, who seemed most like me, who I thought would carry on my legacy the way I envisioned. A lifetime of hurt and resentment welled up in me. And I was just collateral damage in your grand plan? The biological daughter you never wanted or prepared for the role you knew might eventually be mine. Before he could answer, the study door burst open. My mother stood there, her perfectly coiffed appearance now disheveled, eyes red from crying. How dare you come here? She hissed at me. Haven't you done enough damage? I didn't do anything, Mom, I said calmly. I didn't know about any of this until today. You could walk away, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. You could let Natalie have what she's worked for her entire life. But no, you'll take it all, won't you? Just to spite us. Margaret, my father warned, this isn't Amelia's fault. She rounded on him. Shut up, Richard. This is your fault. If you hadn't insisted on keeping those damn documents, if you destroyed them like I told you 2 years ago, you wanted to destroy legal documents? I interrupted, incredulous. Do you realize that's a crime? Oh, spare me your moral high ground, she snapped. You have no idea what we went through. Years of trying for a baby, the disappointments, the pain. Natalie saved us. She made our family complete. And what about me? I asked quietly. Where did I fit into this perfect family you'd created? A flash of guilt crossed her face, quickly replaced by defiance. You were unexpected. We'd already established our family dynamic by then. Natalie was 4, already showing such promise. So, you just decided I didn't deserve the same love or opportunities. The hurt in my voice was unmistakable, even to my own ears. My mother sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 62 years. We didn't know how to integrate you without disrupting what we'd built. And you were always so different, quiet, introspective, content to be in your own world. Because I learned early that seeking your approval was futile, I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. I built my own world because there was no place for me in yours. An uncomfortable silence filled the room, broken only when the front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Moments later, Natalie appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger or alcohol, possibly both. Well, isn't this cozy? She spat. The real Thompson family having a heart-to-heart. Natalie, sweetheart, my mother began, rising to go to her. Natalie stepped back. Don't sweetheart me. You've been lying to me my entire life. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To suddenly learn you're not who you thought you were? You're still our daughter, my father said firmly. Nothing changes that. Everything changes that. Natalie shouted. My identity, my position, my future, all built on lies. She turned her fury toward me. And you, little Miss Perfect with her art degree and moral superiority. You must be loving this. I'm as shocked as you are, I said truthfully. None of this is what I expected. Oh, please. She laughed bitterly. You'll take the company, the money, everything that should have been mine. Don't pretend you're not gloating inside. Natalie, I haven't decided anything yet. This is all happening very quickly. Save it, she interrupted. I know exactly what you're going to do. You'll play the wounded victim like you always have, then take everything while pretending to be reluctant about it. My father stood, swaying slightly. Enough, both of you. This situation is difficult for everyone. Difficult? Natalie's voice rose hysterically. That's what you call it when my entire life turns out to be a lie? When the company I've worked for since I was 16 is suddenly being handed to my artist sister who couldn't tell a balance sheet from a paint palette. I might surprise you, I said, anger finally breaking through my composure. Just because I chose a different path doesn't mean I'm incapable of learning the business. Oh, this should be good, Natalie sneered. The curator playing CEO. I give it 6 months before you run the company into the ground. At least I wouldn't have been embezzling funds. I shot back, repeating something I'd overheard years ago at a company Christmas party, a hushed conversation about financial irregularities that Natalie had explained away. The room went deadly silent. My father's face paled further. What did you say? Natalie's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or guilt, before hardening again. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Actually, came a new voice from the doorway, she might. Edgar Harrington stood there, an apologetic expression on his face. Isabel let me in. I thought it best to continue our conversation here, with everyone present. He entered the study, carrying his briefcase. While reviewing the company financials as part of the inheritance proceedings, we discovered some concerning transactions over the past 3 years. Significant sums transferred to offshore accounts, project budgets with unexplained overruns, vendor payments to companies that don't seem to exist. My father turned to Natalie, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. What is he talking about? For the first time, Natalie looked uncertain. Daddy, it's not what it sounds like. I was restructuring some assets for tax purposes, creating a more efficient. Stop lying, my mother interrupted unexpectedly. Richard, she's been taking money for years. I found out last Christmas. The betrayal in my father's eyes was painful to witness. You knew? And said nothing? My mother looked down. She promised she would stop, pay it back slowly. I thought we could handle it privately. How much? My father demanded, turning back to Natalie. Harrington cleared his throat. Preliminary estimates suggest around $15 million. $15 million. My father collapsed back into his chair. My God, Natalie. That's nearly 20% of the company's value. The company is worth more than $75 million? I asked, confused. That's what you always said. It's worth closer to $150 million, Harrington corrected. At least on paper. Though with these financial irregularities and the pending lawsuits. What lawsuits? I interrupted. A look passed between my father and Natalie, a moment of silent communication that excluded me as it always had. Nothing significant, my father said dismissively. Just the usual nuisance suits any construction company faces. Actually, Harrington continued, seemingly determined to bring everything into the open, there are currently 17 active lawsuits against Thompson Construction. Workers' safety violations, substandard materials, contract breaches. The potential liability exceeds $40 million. I looked at Natalie in disbelief. What have you been doing with the company? What needed to be done to show growth and profitability? She shot back defensively. Construction margins are thin. Sometimes corners need to be cut to meet projections. People could have been hurt, I said, horrified. No one died, she retorted coldly. And the legal department can drag these suits out for years until the plaintiffs run out of money or will. I stared at my sister. This woman I'd grown up with, competed with, envied in some ways, and realized I didn't know her at all. Or perhaps I was only now seeing her clearly for the first time. So that's the real reason for the rush to transfer everything to Natalie, I said, turning to my father. Not just your diagnosis. You needed to distance yourself from the company before these issues became public. My father didn't deny it. The Thompson name means something in this town. I built that reputation over decades. And I've been protecting it, Natalie insisted. Everything I've done, everything, has been to preserve and grow what you built. By stealing and endangering workers? I asked incredulously. By doing whatever it takes, she shouted. While you were off playing with paintings, I was fighting to keep this family on top. Do you have any idea how hard it is to compete in this industry? The bribes you have to pay, the inspectors you have to fool, the corners you have to cut? My father put his head in his hands. Enough, Natalie. Just enough. The room fell silent again, the full weight of the family's deception. And its consequences settling over us all. My perfect, successful, enviable family was actually built on lies, fraud, and corruption. The company I'd just discovered I was legally entitled to inherit was facing financial ruin and legal jeopardy. What happens now? I finally asked Harrington. That depends largely on you, Miss Thompson, he replied carefully. As the legal heir under the terms of the original documents, you have options. You could take control of the company and attempt to address these issues. You could negotiate a different arrangement with your family, or you could walk away entirely. Natalie stepped forward, her expression suddenly calculating. If you really care about this family, Amelia, you'll sign everything back to me. I'm the only one who knows how to run this business, how to navigate the challenges we're facing. The challenges you created, I pointed out. Details, she said dismissively. The point is, you're not equipped to handle this. You'll destroy everything our father built. Don't pretend you care about Dad's legacy, I replied. Not after what you've done to it already. Girls, please, my mother interjected. We need to present a united front. The family reputation. Is that all you care about? I interrupted, finally losing patience. Appearances? What people will think. There are real issues here: fraud, safety violations, lawsuits. People could have been hurt because of how this company has been run. Don't be so dramatic, my mother sniffed. These things happen in business. I looked at my family, my dying father, slumped in his chair, my mother, still more concerned with social standing than ethics, and Natalie, the sister I'd spent a lifetime trying to measure up to, now revealed as a fraud in more ways than one. I need time to think, I said finally. This is all overwhelming. Don't take too long, Natalie said, her voice hardening again. And understand this, if you try to take what's mine, I will fight you with everything I have. Blood doesn't make you worthy of the Thompson name. The phrase struck me like a physical blow, not because of its cruelty, but because of its familiarity. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Me at 15, passing by my father's partially open study door, overhearing Natalie's voice saying, "She doesn't even look like a Thompson. Are you sure she's really yours?" And my father's reply, low and warning. Natalie, we've discussed this. Blood doesn't make you worthy of the Thompson name. Loyalty and contribution do. Remember that. I'd been confused by the exchange at the time, assuming it was about some distant relative. Now, the true meaning was painfully clear. Natalie had known, or at least suspected, the truth about her adoption for years. And instead of coming to terms with it, she'd conspired with our parents to maintain the fiction, all while working to secure her position and undermine mine. I turned to leave, suddenly needing air, space, time to process everything. At the door, I paused and looked back at them, these strangers who were my family. "I'll be in touch through Mr. Harrington," I said quietly. "I suggest you all prepare for significant changes." As I walked out of my childhood home, I felt oddly light, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. The truth, however painful, was bringing a clarity I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I saw my family and myself without illusion or pretense. And in that moment of clarity, I began to understand what I needed to do next. I couldn't face returning to my hotel room immediately after leaving my parents' house. Instead, I drove aimlessly through my hometown, past landmarks of my childhood, the elementary school where Natalie had been student council president and I'd been just Natalie's little sister, the community center where she'd won dance competitions while I sat in the audience with my sketchbook, the country club where my father had proudly introduced her to business associates while I trailed behind, invisible. Eventually, I found myself parking outside the storage facility where my father kept family heirlooms and documents that wouldn't fit in the mansion's already crowded attic. On impulse, I used the key code I'd been given years ago, 0429, Natalie's birthday, of course, and made my way to the Thompson unit. The space was meticulously organized, with labeled boxes stacked neatly on industrial shelving. I moved past containers marked Richard, college memorabilia, and Natalie, pageant trophies, until I found a section labeled simply Abraham. My grandfather had died when I was 11, but I remembered him fondly as the only family member who seemed genuinely interested in my artistic pursuits. "You see the world differently, little one," he'd tell me. "That's a gift, not a flaw." I opened a dusty box containing his personal effects, cufflinks, watches, pipes, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal. Curious, I began to flip through it, finding business notes, family observations, and occasionally more philosophical musings. One entry from 1998, just months before his death, caught my attention. "Richard continues grooming Natalie for company leadership despite my warnings about Thomas's will conditions. The girl shows aptitude, but lacks the true Thompson spirit. That blend of creativity and pragmatism that built this company. The younger one, Amelia, has it in spades, though Richard refuses to see it. She watches, observes, understands more than they realize. If only Richard would nurture that potential instead of trying to force Natalie into a mold that doesn't fit her natural talents. I fear what may happen when the truth eventually comes to light, as it inevitably must." I sat back against the storage unit wall, clutching the journal. My grandfather had seen in me what my parents never had: potential, value, a true Thompson spirit. And he'd anticipated the crisis now unfolding, though he hadn't lived to witness it. The next morning, I met with Edgar Harrington in his office, determined to understand exactly what I was facing. "The situation is complex but not hopeless," he explained, spreading financial documents across his desk. "The company's core business remains sound. The issues stem primarily from Natalie's management decisions over the past 3 years. And these lawsuits?" I asked. "How serious are they really?" "Serious enough," he admitted. "But many could be settled for reasonable amounts if addressed promptly and honestly. The real challenge is the financial discrepancies. We need forensic accountants to trace where the money went and determine if recovery is possible." "And the actual value of the company?" "Dad always claimed it was worth $75 million. Harrington removed his glasses. "Your father has been conservative in his valuations for some time, partly for tax purposes, partly to manage expectations. Our latest assessment puts Thompson Construction's value at approximately $150 million, not including real estate holdings and investment portfolios." I blinked in surprise. "So the family is worth close to $200 million, on paper at least. Though with these legal and financial issues, that could change rapidly if not addressed." My head was spinning. I'd grown up knowing we were wealthy, but this exceeded even my understanding. And all of it was apparently legally mine to claim or to lose. "I need to understand the business better before I make any decisions," I said finally. "Can you arrange access to the company headquarters? I want to see the operation firsthand." Harrington nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. I'll make the arrangements for tomorrow morning." That afternoon, I called Marcus, my ex, who specialized in corporate law. Our relationship had ended partly because of my trust issues, but we'd remained on cordial terms. "Amelia," he answered, sounding pleasantly surprised. "It's been a while." "I need your advice," I said directly. "Professionally. It's complicated and confidential." We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, where I explained the situation in detail. Marcus listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me talk through the tangled web of family secrets and business concerns. "So legally, you're the rightful heir to a $200 million fortune that's being mismanaged and possibly defrauded by your adopted sister, who until yesterday you thought was your biological sibling," he summarized when I finished. "And your father is dying. Your mother is complicit in decades of deception, and you have no experience in construction or business management." "That about covers it," I agreed with a weak smile. "Objectively speaking, you have 3 options," he said, slipping into lawyer mode. 1. Walk away completely. Let your family deal with the consequences of their actions. 2. Claim your inheritance, but sell the company immediately. There would still be buyers despite the issues, though at a significantly reduced valuation. Or 3. Take control and try to save the business. "Which would you recommend?" I asked. "That depends," he said carefully. "What do you want, Amelia?" Not what do you think you should do, or what would hurt or help your family the most. What do you want for yourself? It was a question I hadn't really considered. I'd spent so much of my life reacting to my family's expectations and dismissals that I rarely focused on my own desires. I began slowly. I want to prove them wrong. To show that I am capable, that I could have been valuable to the family business if they'd ever given me a chance. But I also want to do the right thing, for the employees, for the clients who trusted the Thompson name. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Then I think you already know which path you're leaning toward. But before you commit, you need more information. The next morning, I arrived at Thompson Construction headquarters, a gleaming 12-story building downtown with a family name emblazoned in massive letters across the facade. The receptionist looked startled when I gave my name. Miss Thompson? As in, Richard Thompson's daughter. Yes, I confirmed. Mr. Harrington should have called ahead about my visit. Of course, she said, quickly composing herself. Diana Fisher, the executive assistant, will be your guide today. Diana turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had worked for my father for over 20 years. She greeted me with cautious professionalism as she led me through the building. I'm surprised we haven't met before, I commented as we toured the executive floor. Not really, she replied candidly. Your father and sister preferred to keep the corporate and family sides of their lives separate. Except for each other, of course. Throughout the morning, Diana introduced me to department heads, project managers, and key personnel. Most seemed confused by my presence but were politely welcoming. I noticed, however, that many exchanged worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. During lunch in the executive dining room, I finally addressed the elephant in the room. Diana, you've been with my father for decades. You must know what's really going on here. She hesitated, carefully setting down her fork. Miss Thompson, Amelia, please. Amelia. I've built my career on discretion and loyalty. I understand that. But things are changing at Thompson Construction, perhaps dramatically. Wouldn't you rather help shape that change than be blindsided by it? She studied me for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Follow me. Diana led me to a small office on a lower floor, away from the executive suite. She closed the door and pulled a key from around her neck, unlocking a filing cabinet in the corner. I've kept these separate from the official books, she explained, extracting several folders. Call it insurance, or perhaps just professional thoroughness. The folders contained detailed financial records, a shadow accounting system documenting the actual state of the company's finances. As I flipped through the pages, I saw evidence of the embezzlement Harrington had mentioned, along with concerning patterns of safety violations, inspection bribes, and quality control failures. How long has this been going on? I asked, feeling sick. The serious financial irregularities began about 3 years ago, when Natalie took more control, Diana explained. But the corner cutting on projects started earlier, maybe 5 years back, when your father began stepping back due to health issues he kept private. And the offshore accounts? The missing $15 million? Diana's expression hardened slightly. $17.3 million, actually. Most went to accounts in the Caymans. Some funded a real estate development in Belize under a shell company called Thornton Ventures. Natalie's venture, I realized, remembering her mentioning a vacation property investment I'd assumed was legitimate. Diana nodded. There's more. 3 major projects are currently facing serious structural issues that haven't been publicly disclosed. The Henderson office complex, the Riverside development, and the North County Bridge all have potential safety concerns that were documented but ignored. People could die, I whispered, horrified. That's why I'm showing you this, Diana said grimly. I've tried working through proper channels. Your father wouldn't listen. Natalie threatened to fire me if I kept interfering. I was planning to go to the authorities next week if nothing changed. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the documentation Diana had preserved, meeting more employees, and touring a nearby construction site. By the time I returned to my hotel that evening, I had a much clearer picture of what I was facing. And what was at stake? My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father's condition has worsened. Doctors say weeks, not months. Whatever you're planning, consider his peace of mind in his final days. It was a masterful guilt trip, designed to manipulate me into backing down. The old Amelia might have capitulated, desperate for parental approval even at the cost of her own integrity. But I wasn't that person anymore. Instead of responding, I called Gabriella. "So you're secretly a construction heiress now?" she asked after I'd updated her on the situation. "That's a plot twist I didn't see coming." "What would you do?" asked her. Honestly, I'd take the company, fix the problems, and prove to everyone, especially yourself, that you were always more capable than they gave you credit for." She paused. "But I'd also understand if you walked away from the whole toxic mess." The next day, I received a call from Natalie. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Not at the house. Too many ears. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour." I found her sitting on a bench overlooking the water, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Without her usual power suit and perfect makeup, she seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "I've been thinking about our situation," she began when I sat down beside her. "I have a proposal." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "You sign over controlling interest in the company to me. In return, I'll give you $20 million, your fair share of the family fortune, and you can go back to your museum job and never deal with any of this again. And the lawsuits? The safety violations? The missing funds?" She waved dismissively. "Business problems that I know how to handle." "By continuing to cover them up?" I challenged. "By doing what needs to be done to protect the Thompson legacy." She snapped, her composure cracking. "Do you think you can just waltz in with your art degree and fix everything? You have no idea what it takes to run this company." "Maybe not," I conceded. "But I know enough to recognize that your management has brought it to the brink of disaster." She laughed bitterly. "You really believe that, don't you? That I'm the villain in this story? Did it ever occur to you that I might have been trying to save the company from Dad's increasingly poor decisions? That the missing money might have been going to shore up failing projects he insisted on pursuing? That I've been working 80-hour weeks trying to keep everything from collapsing while he focused on his golf game and charity galas?" Her version gave me pause. "Is that really what happened?" "Partly," she admitted after a moment. "The truth is messy. Dad was making mistakes. I was covering for him, then taking more control, making my own decisions, some good, some bad. Things spiraled. I took money I shouldn't have, yes. But most of it was meant to be temporary, investments that would pay off and let me replace the funds before anyone noticed. And the safety issues? The substandard materials?" She looked away. "Corners I cut trying to keep projects profitable while dealing with Dad's mistakes. I'm not proud of that part." We sat in silence for a while, two sisters who had never really known each other, finally having something resembling an honest conversation. "Why did you hate me so much growing up?" I finally asked, the question that had lingered for decades. Natalie looked surprised. "I didn't hate you. I was afraid of you." "Afraid? Of me? Why?" "Because you were their real daughter," she said quietly. "I overheard them arguing when I was 12. Mom let it slip during a fight that I was adopted. Dad made her promise never to tell me, but I knew. And then when you came along, their miracle biological child, I was terrified you'd replace me, that they'd love you more because you were their real child." "That's absurd," I said. "They always favored you." "They overcompensated," she corrected. "They felt guilty about the lie, so they gave me everything, pushed me to succeed, held me up as the perfect daughter. But I always knew it was conditional. I had to earn my place in the family in a way you didn't." The irony was almost too much to bear. While I'd grown up feeling inadequate compared to Natalie, she'd been harboring her own insecurities about me. "What a mess," I sighed. "So what now?" "Now you decide," she said, standing up. "Take my offer and walk away, or fight me for control. But understand this, if you choose to fight, I won't hold back. I've worked too hard for too long to just hand everything over to you because of some ancient inheritance clause." As she walked away, I realized that the decision facing me was about much more than money or legal rights. It was about who I wanted to be, what legacy I wanted to create for myself, and whether I could find a path forward that honored the truth while creating something better than the mess my family had made. 3 days after my meeting with Natalie, my father was hospitalized following a severe decline in his condition. Despite our complicated relationship, I felt compelled to visit him. The hospital room was somber when I arrived, my mother sitting rigidly by his bedside, Natalie pacing near the window. My father looked shockingly frail, the aggressive cancer having ravaged his once imposing frame. His eyes, however, remained sharp and alert as I entered. "Amelia," he acknowledged weakly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I admitted, taking a seat on the opposite side of the bed from my mother. "Have you made your decision?" he asked directly, typical of his no-nonsense approach. "I have," I confirmed. "But first, I think we all need to see the complete picture." I nodded toward the door, where Edgar Harrington entered, followed by a distinguished-looking man carrying a leather portfolio. "What is this?" my mother demanded, immediately defensive. "This is Martin Reynolds, a forensic accountant I hired to review the company financials," I explained calmly. "Mr. Harrington has the legal documents ready as well." Natalie stepped forward, her posture tense. "If you think you're going to ambush us with accusations while Dad is lying in a hospital bed, this isn't an ambush," I interrupted. "It's clarity. Something this family has needed for a very long time." I turned to Reynolds, who opened his portfolio and began methodically outlining his findings. The picture that emerged was even more troubling than I'd initially realized. Beyond Natalie's embezzlement, there were years of financial manipulation, tax evasion strategies that crossed into illegality, and a pattern of covering up serious safety and quality issues. "The company is essentially operating on borrowed time," Reynolds concluded. "Without immediate intervention, including financial restructuring, settlements with pending litigants, and disclosure to regulatory authorities, Thompson Construction will likely face bankruptcy within 18 months, possibly criminal charges as well." My father closed his eyes briefly, the weight of these revelations clearly paining him. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Natalie. "Is this true?" For a moment, I thought she might continue denying everything. Instead, something in her seemed to crumble. "It started small," she said, her voice barely audible. "Covering up a mistake here, moving money there. I was trying to live up to your expectations, to be the daughter you wanted. But I was drowning, Dad. Every success you expected bigger ones. Nothing was ever enough." My mother began to cry silently, her perfectly manicured hands covering her face. My father turned to me, a question in his eyes. "I'm taking control of the company," I stated firmly. "Effective immediately. Mr. Harrington has the paperwork ready." "You'll destroy everything," my mother said through her tears. "You know nothing about this business." "I know enough to recognize it needs saving," I replied. "Not just financially, but ethically. The Thompson name should stand for something better than fraud and corner cutting." "And what about Natalie?" my father asked, his voice weak but concerned. "After everything she's done, you'll cut her out completely?" I shook my head.
No.
"That's not who I want to be." I turned to my sister. "I'm offering you a position in the restructured company. Director of Client Relations, a role with real responsibility, but with oversight and transparency. A chance to rebuild your reputation and contribute positively." Natalie looked stunned. "Why would you do that? After everything?" "Because despite it all, you're still my sister," I said simply. "And because you do have valuable skills and experience. This way, you can use them constructively." "And the other issues?" my father asked carefully. "We'll self-report the safety violations and begin immediate remediation," I said firmly. "We'll reach out to the litigants and work toward fair settlements. We'll restructure the company finances transparently, with restitution where possible." "The scandal will destroy us socially," my mother protested, clutching her designer purse like a shield. "Perhaps it's time we valued integrity over social standing," I replied. "The company employs hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on its survival. They matter more than country club memberships. My father studied me with newfound interest, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You sound like my father," he said quietly. He always said the true measure of the Thompson name was how we treated our workers, not how many galas we attended. "Grandfather saw something in me that you didn't," I told him, thinking of the journal I'd found. He believed I had the true Thompson spirit, a blend of creativity and pragmatism. He told me that once. My father admitted. I dismissed it. "You reminded me so much of my mother with your artistic talents. She was difficult, emotional. I didn't want to see those qualities encouraged in you." The revelation struck me deeply. All these years, I'd been pushed aside because I reminded my father of someone who had hurt him. "You punished me for a resemblance I couldn't help." "I didn't see it that way then," he replied weakly. "I see it now." Natalie had moved to the window, her back to us, as she absorbed everything that was happening. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said finally, turning back to face us. "I just wanted to make you proud, Dad. To be worthy of the Thompson name, even if I didn't have Thompson blood." "Oh, Natalie," my father sighed. "I failed you both, didn't I? Pushed one too hard, and the other not enough." The room fell silent as we all contemplated the decades of dysfunction that had led us to this moment. Finally, my father reached for my hand. "Do it your way, Amelia," he said. "Save what can be saved. Build something better than what I created." 2 weeks later, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was a subdued affair, attended by business associates who whispered behind their hands about the rumors already circulating regarding Thompson Construction's troubles. I stood beside Natalie and my mother, the three of us presenting a united front despite our private turmoil. In the months that followed, I immersed myself in learning every aspect of the construction business. I hired experienced executives to guide me, but made the final decisions myself. We disclosed the safety issues, initiated repairs on problematic projects, settled lawsuits where we were clearly at fault, and implemented stringent new quality control measures. The financial restructuring was painful, but necessary. We sold off non-essential assets, including the family mansion, which my mother reluctantly relinquished. She used a portion of the proceeds to establish a foundation supporting ethical adoption practices, her own form of atonement. Natalie struggled initially in her new role with reduced authority and constant oversight. There were tense moments and heated arguments, but gradually, she began to find satisfaction in building client relationships honestly, without the pressure of running the entire operation. "I'm sleeping better," she admitted to me over coffee one morning, 6 months into the new arrangement. I didn't realize how much anxiety I was carrying, trying to maintain all those lies. "We all were," I agreed. "Each in our own way." A year after taking control, I moved the company headquarters to a revitalized area of the city's arts district, a symbolic blending of my two worlds. I established a scholarship program for promising students from underprivileged backgrounds interested in construction, architecture, and engineering, naming it after my grandfather Abraham. The company survived the transition, emerging smaller but stronger, with a renewed commitment to quality and ethics. We lost some clients who had benefited from the old corrupt practices, but gained others who valued our new transparency and integrity. On the second anniversary of my father's death, I hung 2 portraits in my office, one of my grandfather Abraham, whose wisdom and foresight had ultimately saved the family legacy, and one of myself, the unlikely heir who had found her place at last. The Thompson name still meant something in our community, but something different now. Not just wealth and power, but responsibility and integrity as well. I had proven that I was worthy of my inheritance, not because of my blood, but because of my choices. As for my mother and sister, our relationships remained complicated but gradually improved. The walls of secrecy that had divided us for so long had finally crumbled, allowing us to see each other as flawed, complex human beings rather than the roles we'd been assigned in our family drama. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if those yellowed documents had never been discovered, if I had continued in my museum career, never knowing the truth about my family or my rightful inheritance. But life has a way of bringing truth to light eventually, no matter how deeply it's buried. Looking back on that moment in the lawyer's office when everything changed, I realize now it wasn't just about money or property, or even justice. It was about claiming my place in the world and writing my own story instead of accepting the limited role others had assigned me. Sometimes I visit my father's grave, not out of obligation, but to reflect on the complicated legacy he left behind. I'm running the company my way now, I tell him. Not your way, not Natalie's way. My way. And somehow, I think he'd finally understand. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Family secrets and betrayals can leave scars that last a lifetime, but they can also lead to unexpected growth and renewal. Has anyone else experienced a moment that completely changed how you saw your family? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about family dynamics, justice, and finding your own path. Remember to share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to claim your rightful place in the world, whether that's in a family business or simply in your own life story. Until next time, this is Amelia Thompson, reminding you that blood isn't always what defines family. Sometimes it's the choices we make and the integrity we bring to those choices that matter most.